Welcome to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. As always, I am your host, Nina Mueller, and this is the place where you get your dose of upfront and honest conversations with people from all around the world. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Upfront Podcast. I have asked Liz back from episode number 3 of the Upfront Podcast to speak on different experiences. We will talk about feminism, dating experiences, and how some people nowadays seem to be confused by what it means to date emancipated, independent women. I would like to preface this episode by shortly explaining what feminism, factually speaking, is. It is the fight for equal rights, which in no way is there to take away anything from anyone who doesn't identify as female. I would like to add a personal stance here on the common misconception and argument against feminism that I hear a lot, which is that men don't know how to behave around independent women who have equal rights now, which I personally believe that this has a lot more to do with the patriarchy being ingrained in all of us from a young age, because we all have to live in this patriarchal system. Now, for everyone listening, I would like to state clearly that this is merely an exchange of opinions and a conversation between two individuals with their own opinions, not meant to degrade anyone. If you don't know how to treat women once they have equal rights and are emancipated, that is actually a testimony to what you have been taught by society, and my recommendation here is to simply treat all genders equally with respect and consideration. We'll begin by hearing directly from Liz, whose take on feminism is quite different from my own.
It seems like a lot of the things that are happening around me, where we are fighting for our equality and where we are talking about like women's issues and women's rights, we're doing it at the expense or at the detriment of guys who at this point seem very lost. A big sweeping statement, I realize that, but like when I see day-to-day behavior from my friends, colleagues, people I interact with, let's say we're getting more paid holidays and things, or like maternity leaves are becoming longer, and that's wonderful, but then guys don't know what to do with themselves, and they don't know if they should open the door for you or if you're gonna get offended. Or like I went on a few dates with a person, and his instinctive reaction was to want to open the door for me to get into the car, and then he kind of hesitated and paused, and I saw this look and this reaction that he had where he looked at me and he was like, "Is it okay that I'm doing this?" And I was like, "Yes, please, more." And this thing where men are being left without the tools to deal with what it means to be in a space where we're all kind of equal. And I say kind of because I still don't want to be equal. I still want you to lift the heavy thing for me. I can totally do it myself, but do I need to? Isn't the greatest thing about all of us being in this giant soup of life together that we get to do things together? It's not a zero-sum game, it does, I don't have to win at the expense of you losing. I don't want anyone to lose. I want everyone to win.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it makes up one of the misconceptions of feminism altogether, is that a lot of people think that women want to be the same as men, which is not true. And we're not going to take anything away from another gender, but in terms of rights and everything. But what you mentioned about opening the door or lifting something for someone, I think that has less to do with gender, but more appreciation for the other person, right?
Yes. And the men around me are starting to doubt themselves, which is nice because, it's always good to doubt yourself to a healthy degree. But I feel like that degree of doubt, or, their processes that they're going through at this point, are almost detrimental. Like I said, they're not sure of where they stand and what all of this means to them. What does it mean that we have equal rights? And it's important for all of us to kind of come to this understanding that we're in this soup together. And it doesn't matter what gender or color or anything that you are, because until we realize that we're all interconnected, which we are, all the things that we do on the surface are not going to make an ounce of a difference in the sense of, like, okay, you can have a maternity leave and a paternity leave, and it's wonderful. Like, I think it's so life affirming that these things are happening. But until everyone starts taking responsibility for themselves and also acknowledging that it's important to take care of yourself first, we're not going to understand what any of this equality means. And that's my take. Like, my dad was the director of the Department of Women's Affairs in Bangladesh, and my mom used to always laugh. She was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna run the head of the Department of Men's Affairs because men don't know how to act." And like, I used to laugh about it too, but I think the more I go through life, the more I see how, like, it's kind of funny, but like in this ironic way that, like, at this point, I kind of see it like manifesting in people's behavior, or like more men's behavior, that they don't know what they're doing, and it's really, like, for me, it's really upsetting, because I want all of us to just get along. As simple as that sounds, and I think that's one of the hardest things there is to do, to get along. Um, to
Yeah, but
under-
then that's more on like a personal level, right? In terms of like legal rights and pay gap and those like percentages in corporations where they have to have a certain percentage of women on, corporate boards, and so on. I mean, and
Mhm.
that is a different story, right?
Yes and no, because the people who are still sitting on those boards, they're going to elect or bring in women or people of color or of different, like, bring in diversity just because somebody said that they should do that. Behind the scenes, the way they're operating is still the same because the thinking hasn't shifted, like you said, okay, like in a board, you bring in like two women just because somebody needs to show somebody a number, right? And it's wonderful. Okay, you see something happening on the surface, but underneath, the person who's pulling the strings or the person who's making the decision or the person who's signing off on hiring those two women is still a man. And I have nothing
Mm.
against that, but if you're not promoting and upholding that belief in all other areas of your life, then it's superficial, right? He's just electing or hiring somebody for his board because he has to show face.
I do understand what you mean, and I'm kind of with you on that topic. And I do see that as an advantage to start to change mindsets of people. But yeah, I think we should eventually get to a point, which is far away for now, where gender doesn't matter in the sense that you just hire the best qualified person, and whatever gender they are or identify as, they're going
Mhm.
to get the same pay as the other genders.
Yeah,
I think that should be the norm, actually.
yeah, that would be nice. I once threatened to leave a job because I found out that somebody who was doing much less work than I was making twice as much, and they were getting twice
Hmm.
as many days off. And I found that out by accident because I went down to see an accountant, like in this office where I was working, and he had one of the papers on the table. So when I dropped off my paperwork, I kind of just like happened to see this other piece of paper, and I went, "How is this possible?" I went, "Okay, this person is bringing in like not even 1/18th of what I bring in from my clients, and I'm getting paid less. What is this?" And then when I went to see the managing director, who also happened to be a woman, um, and she was a big proponent of feminism, and she was talking on the national TVs, and she was on lots of boards of directors. She was advocating for a lot of things, but it was mostly in talk. Like, it was kind of like this lip service to feminism. And then when I came to her and I said, "Look, what is this?" And she was like, "Well, first of all, you weren't supposed to see that." So I kind of felt slightly like she was adding insult to injury. And
Mm.
she went, "Well, and besides, like, you're very young," and I was young, like I was 19, and this person was above 40 or whatever, and she was like, "Well, he's worked here, for I don't know, 10, 15 years. He has a family, you don't. And I went, what does that have to do with anything? Like, you're going to talk about feminism, and then when I come to you and say, like, what is this? At some point, she also said, well, he's a man, he's got to take care of his family. And I went, wonderful.
Wow.
Like,
Hmm.
why am I being left out of the equation for, I don't see the justification or the reasoning behind what you're saying.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe she might not know this, but you might be supporting a whole town that she
yeah,
doesn't know of, right? I
exactly.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
like, and I kind of went, you know what? I quit. And it turned into a whole thing where they gave me like a promotion and a raise, and like they paid for like a month's leave, and it was quite an interesting battle as well, because it was like every other turn in that office I would literally have to fight for things that people were already getting for just existing. And I felt like, why am I not getting those things? And you're giving me absolutely no incentive to stay here. Or like, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, you're giving me all the reasons to leave. And it's interesting, right? Like when people look
Mm-hmm.
at and they think, well, she's young, she's probably just gonna get married, and she doesn't need money.
Yeah, but do you think anyone has ever cared whether a man in whatever position is going to have a family?
I don't
You
know.
know,
I don't know.
like that always went through my mind. I'm like, hmm.
That's that's a really good one, because I mean, I'll tell you this, like when I came to Israel, like the first couple of years when I was applying to startups, and I could pull up a list, because I started applying to like the top 50 startups, and I would get asked these questions that to this day blow my mind, including why are you so black? Which, like I wanted to
Wow.
roll off of my chair, and
Hmm.
I like my jaw literally dropped because I was looking at this woman sitting across from me, and I hadn't noticed anything about her, like on the surface, except for, okay, she was the HR director, and this was like one of the final stages of interviewing for this company. And we're sitting in this glass office, and I can see the whole floor. And as we look out, she's like, "Do you think you'll fit in here?" And I look out, and I mean, I'm sorry, but for lack of better terminology, it's all these bro types who are just sitting there coding, and they all happen to be of, European descent. And I'm looking at them, and I don't look like them, and I'm a woman, and it's like 99% men. And I go, no, I don't think I'll fit in here. And then as I turn back to her, she goes, oh, well, I wanted to ask you, like, why are you so black? And I was like, are you seeing, like, in my mind, I just didn't have the words, because, it's like I'd
Hmm.
never been asked that question. Like, people have asked me, like, are you Mexican? Like, are you Brazilian? Like, where are you from? Like, there's different ways that I've been asked, about my race or where I'm from. But this was the first time somebody just point blank just went, like, why are you so black? And I'm looking at her, and I
Wow.
started laughing. And it was, like the kind of awful, nervous, I'm really trying to control myself and not hit you right now because I want
Hmm.
to. I started laughing, and I suddenly noticed that she's blonde. And then, like, in my head, I just went, oh my God, like, she's blonde. And I went, well, why are you so blonde? As I continue laughing, because, I have no words or like no
Hmm.
coping mechanism for this, because it's never happened to me. Um,
And also, how do you respond to that? I mean,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah. I was like,
Uh-huh.
well, why are you so blonde? Ha ha ha. Like, what do you say? And I went, no, you know what? Listen, I won't fit in here. Obviously, based on your question, I'm gonna go now. Um,
No,
and
good for
then
you.
and then there like almost every other time, like I was asked, are you married? Do you plan to get married? Will you have children? When do you plan on having children?
Wait, they can actually ask this in Israel?
No, they can't, right? And I didn't,
Mm.
and this was a while ago, and I also didn't really think about it, I think, like, or I didn't pay that much attention to it. But I would notice that when I would come home after the interviews, I'd always feel like as if I bathed in slime, and I couldn't put a finger on it. And it took me a while. Like a few months later, I went, oh my God, it's because they kept asking me all these questions that they're not legally, morally, I don't know, like on any level supposed to ask, because it has nothing to
Hmm.
do with my skills. and it has nothing to do with anything. And like, how many times do they ask like Omer, who comes for an interview, like, when do you plan to get married? Like, never.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when I shared this with my friends, and most of them are men, like they went, "Really? They ask you that stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah. Like, when do you plan to have children? None of your business, perhaps." Do
Not even if, like,
like, yeah, like,
maybe start it there if you have to ask. Like, that's weird.
yeah, and it's really interesting because, like, some people like kind of in Israel, right? They brushed it off and said it's part of the culture. Like, don't pay attention to it. And I
It's
went,
still
like,
offensive though. Like,
yeah, it made me pause and go, you know what? You can't
hmm.
be brushing these. Like, there's a number of things that I think we should be brushing off because I think we're all a little underdeveloped mentally, for lack of a better way of putting it. Like, I think we can all do better, right? But to say or to ask questions like this and to dismiss them in terms of, I don't know, levels of offensiveness, or to say that, oh, it's part of the culture, it kind of tells me that there's something wrong with the culture, perhaps, then.
You were born in Russia and raised in Bangladesh, and then you've lived all over the world. What were your observations of how women are treated differently in different places?
There are many things to say about both countries and how they were different, but also very similar in their treatment of women. From where I stand today, like, I've learned to appreciate a lot of the stuff that maybe a few years ago I would have looked down upon. I'll elaborate on that. Growing up, when I would go to Russia and I would see like incredibly strong, fierce, very determined, very capable, highly intelligent women having men do most of the work, let's say. Like, simply put, right? To me it kind of looked like they're manipulating them. But today I think a strong, independent, capable woman is able to also play along and add to the strengths of a man in her life. I think that's an incredible power, as opposed to what I used to think was a manipulation. In Bangladesh, for example, we used to have a very matriarchal society. My grandma was the head of, she used to be the head of the household, and she kind of kept everyone together, and everything happened around meals, and all of her wisdom was shared at a meal. And I think there's tremendous value to that, because I think as women, as we age, there's a lot of knowledge that accumulates in our bodies and in our minds and in our hearts. And there's a lot of potency to that.
Was she head of the household though, or of the family?
At the household. Um,
Hmm.
there's also a tribe in Bangladesh called the Morong, which I'm a incredibly big fan of. I think there's fewer and fewer of them left today. But the Morong have a matriarchal society to the degree that, let's say, if a woman's about to get married, or she declares that she's interested in a man or having a man as a partner, so all the women will line up, like they kind of build like a throne, like, stage like kind of area. All the women gather together,
Hmm.
and they'll sit there, and the woman who's declared that she wants to have someone in her life, or she's interested, she'll announce it, and all the men will parade themselves like peacocks. So the women don't dress up, right? The women just come as they are, and the men start putting flowers in their hair, and they put on their prettiest attires, and they'll weave their own material, and it's a process that takes months. And then, like, on a specific day, all the men will parade themselves in front of this woman, and this woman gets to give them tasks. Like, she can say, "I want a deer's antler," and they literally have to go and find it. And they still do it to this day and age, which I find
Hmm.
fascinating and, like, very, like, really great, actually. Um, and then, the woman could also have, children or a child from a previous partner, or, however she came around to having that child. And it has nothing to do with the man, in the sense of, she's not necessarily attached in a relationship or like in a romantic partnership. So if she does have children, like, she could, give the man a task to do something with the child, or like to see how he handles children. And I find it fascinating because then once the men have, proven their worth, the women will come together and decide on who's the best one for this woman. And then the woman also obviously gets to decide on her own. She essentially gets like a parade. Like, I think it has its own merits. And also because it's a matriarchal society, like all the women are deciding on how to raise the children because they're raised in the community and not just by the mother, they're raised by everyone together. So one of the most interesting things you'll see in like a Morong tribe is like they don't say no to children. They say you'll learn or you will find what is for you. So if you see like a little child pick up, somebody's tobacco pipe, the Morong adults will look at the child, but they won't say anything because they're going to wait for the child to find out, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, whether they want to do this or don't want to do this. And I think it's a really beautiful philosophy because also they come from their belief system is that when God was giving out like all the religious texts to all the people of the world, the Morong were actually busy harvesting their crops, so they couldn't send anyone to pick up their book. So they sent a cow instead, and they asked the cow like, "Hey, can you go to God and pick up this important document that he's trying to send over?" And the cow went, and it turned out that God had written all of the rules for the Morong tribe on a banana leaf, and the cow, picked it up, and it was a long trek back to the tribe, and the cow ate the banana leaf. And when it got to the tribe, like they said, "Hey, where's our book? Where's our religion?" And the cow just kind of looked at them and said, "Well, I ate it. I guess you're gonna have to make it up as you go." And so that's kind of how they live, that they figure things out by just living. And it's something that also the women had decided, that they said, "Listen, like we're just gonna live and see where we end up." There's a big merit to that in the sense of like lived truth is more potent than anything anyone will ever tell you.
Yeah, I think that that's a really nice way to look at the world, but I think unfortunately, we're just nowhere close to being able to do that. Because I think we are living in a system that is to the great disadvantage of so many people. Anybody really who's not white, cisgendered male, really, and Christian, preferably, I guess. So yeah, I think there's a systemic issue here at
Hmm.
work. For me personally, in my opinion, I think that has to change first, and then we can get to these utopic kind of ideologies, I guess. So I would say there are many different versions and nuances of what is considered feminine, and it certainly doesn't follow a set of rigid rules like all genders and identities. What is feminine to you personally?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about it recently myself as well. Um,
Mm.
I mean, if I were to break it down, it comes down to like a set of words, like off the top of my head. It comes down to grace. It comes down to a softness and an allowing, because I think like the masculine energy, which we all, I think we all have like a feminine and a masculine, and they're like kind of this yin yang combination that we get to play with throughout the day, or throughout our lives. That
Mhm.
if the masculine to me feels more like this rigid, time bound, straightforward, gunning for something like the hunter type. I think the feminine is more gracious and allowing and going with the flow, but also having good boundaries, because good boundaries allow for good neighbors.
Yeah, I think that might be true actually, because when you look at like governments with a majority or even led by female politicians, they seem to be a lot more successful. So I
Yeah,
think flexibility, yeah, definitely has something to do with that.
Bangladesh has been led by women almost since its inception. So we've had essentially two. female prime ministers. And we go from one to the other every election term because that's how it is. It's a bipartisan party, party of two. And I don't know if many people in the world know that, but Bangladesh, in terms of its growth metrics, like so the GDP and the quality of life and like how upward mobility for the middle class, like it's doing incredibly well. We've been doing better than the rest of the developed slash developing world. In fact, we're ahead of Israel by like at least 30 years. Even though Israel does sell itself as the startup nation, there are like the lines of poverty and development here are much lower than in Bangladesh, where we have a female prime minister. And I don't know if the two things are correlated or if they're causal or what it is. But my hypothesis is that I think women tend to have better boundaries, but also are more fluid at the same time, which makes it easier to make decisions that are important. Because also there's something to be said about going with a gut feeling of just knowing intuitively what's right. Um, and for better or for worse, I think women, because of how we're designed, biologically.
I'm not sure whether not every person has this intuition. I just think that women generally are more in touch with that. And actually, that has to do with like the patriarchal system, in my opinion, as well. Because if men are more in touch with their emotions and have sensibilities for specific things or a range of things, then that is usually kind of frowned upon within like a toxic masculine environment. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I feel like that is kind of suppressed in that patriarchal system that we all have to live in.
Yeah. Okay. So much of what I've been saying and I'm going to say is probably based on my experience.
Yeah, sure.
Take it with a pinch of salt. But I do think, like what you said is absolutely correct. Like I agree with you. Whoever is more in touch with their feminine side, and this applies to everyone across the board, every sentient being, I think, whoever's in touch more with the feminine side is more in touch with their intuition. Yes, there's something to be said about environments where that isn't welcome, but there's also something to be said about people who are just more aware of their energies and just more aware of where their attention is going.
Funny that you bring up the feminine side, because to me, in my opinion personally, I think it has less to do with like feminine or non-binary or male, but intuition just is like when you look at our ancestors like many thousand years ago or millions of years ago, um, they had to have that intuition as well. If they heard a noise or something, it was their gut feeling that told them this might be, I don't know, a tiger coming for me. And I think everybody has that like naturally
Yeah,
to some
like
degree. I mean,
yeah, like I said, it just kind of depends on where your attention's going. Because if you don't, like, if you're not paying attention, or if you're not practicing your intuition, and if you're not allowing it to show up in your life, and if you're not using it or paying attention to it when it calls to you, then just like everything else, just like every part of your body and every muscle and everything else, like every skill you might have, it kind of starts to fade. I was reading somewhere not too long ago about how you can literally practice your intuition. That if you start just noticing throughout the day little moments, like you have to start small. You kind of notice like little moments of knowing, and not just like a kind of mental knowing that like I know black is black, or like like the simpler things that we think we know based on what we've been taught. But this kind of knowing, like when you know you shouldn't cross the street right now for whatever reason. And you can't put a finger on it, but you just know, like, not right now. And the more you start noticing those like micro moments, the more your body starts to send you signals. And the more you can sharpen that tool, the more you can get better at listening to your intuition as opposed to like your cognitive or like your brain chatter.
Now, for something I've seen recently, Greg Matos, a board certified couple and family psychologist from California, has recently published an article in Psychology Today, and that led to pretty public outrage. He wrote, things such as, and this is a direct quote from the article, dating opportunities for heterosexual men are diminishing as relationship standards rise. What do you think? Have our standards really changed, or are we just generally more aware of like toxic behavior in people?
I'm going to answer this from my recent experience in dating.
Sure, yeah.
I think our standards haven't changed. Like you said, I think we're just more aware and we're just not, I think it's become more okay, I think, to just not deal with things that are not acceptable for us. I've bid my farewells to people based on a few text exchanges because, like, those few text exchanges or calls have revealed, like, the microcosm of how they think and operate. And I don't agree with those things. You know, those are not things that can be worked on per se, in the sense of like, I'm not going to sit there and wait for you for another 10 years while you not understand what's going on. Like, there's certain behaviors that are not acceptable. And they never have been, for me at least. And so it's like, I think it's more okay for me to walk away than ever before. And also, perhaps it has to do with the fact that I'm a little bit older than 20 at this point. Um, and I'm really like, I'm excited for this like next generation of 20-year-olds to come out and just do what they need to do earlier. Because I feel like so much of the stuff that has taken me a while to come around to, like, I'm looking at girls who are 18 and 19 and they kind of seem to get it. They kind of seem to have figured out the rules of their game. And I think that's wonderful. And like, I'm also gonna add in this caveat: dating is incredibly fraught with danger. And like, I don't think it's the same thing as when, you know, let's say like my dad courted my mom for nearly a decade, and like for 3 years he would call her only on the phone. Like, they didn't even see each other till after their third year. Like, it's not the same. Like, the speed at which we can get to know someone is incredibly fast, which has both its upsides and its downsides. I think we have more options, which again, you know, there's a plus to it and there's a minus to it. And what I think is really cool is that each and every single one of us gets to decide what's okay and what's not, and kind of move on from there quickly and swiftly, which is great. It's the same person that I've been referring to, because we've been on a few dates now, like 3 or 4. Um,
Oh.
so he said something the other day that kind of like stopped me in my tracks. You know, he said, "Oh, you know, like, you train a lot. I was afraid like you'd be extra muscular." And I stopped and I went, "Huh? What?" And he's like, "Well, you know, I'm glad you still have some feminine curves and stuff." And I was like, "Wow." Like, I'm somehow both flattered and offended at the same time. I'm not sure where we're going with this. And then he said, "I hope you like, do you lift weights?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And then he went, "I hope you're not going to lift any heavier, because if you get more muscular, like, it won't look so good." And that's when I went, "Nope, tilting the scales to offended, and now I'm going to tell you
Oh.
everything I think." And then here's where I found it really interesting that I didn't tell him everything I thought. In my head, I decided for myself that, like, you know what? Fuck you. I'm going to lift heavier and I'm going to get so strong that I'm going to lift you like in a few weeks. Wait for it. Like, the reason I do so many of the things that I do is because I don't want a broken hip when I'm 50. And the reason, like, I went in the direction of offended was because this person literally just looked at the outer covering without asking me why I'm doing it. And that's where we go wrong so often, you know, especially like with this whole issue of gender inequality. It's like we are only looking at the outer packaging. We're not looking at what's underneath, and we're not asking like, why are you here, or what do you want to do, or what's important to you. And it doesn't matter what your race or gender or any ethnicity is. We're not asking the important questions,
Right.
and that's such a pity.
When personally I date men, when men sort of divert the conversation to superficial stuff, and I'm like, oh no. Oh no. Because like looks are going to fade eventually anyway. What you really should be paying attention to is one's heart, soul, whatever you believe in, core values, principles, what they're passionate about, not what their hair looks like, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just sad, I think.
Yeah.
My reaction was kind of like, is he expecting us to feel sorry for them? Like through this
I
article, I was like, I don't
mean,
know. It was just a bit weird to me.
it is
Mm.
weird too. Like I hear you. Like when I share my dating experiences with some of my friends, uh,
Mhm.
most of the women friends in my life will just say, "Yeah, good for you. Keep moving forward." And that's kind of
Mhm.
how I feel. So in a way, it upholds my existing belief. And some of the men have said, "Why don't you lower your standard?" Which I think, like, I've talked to them about it. I'm like, "Why? What do you mean? Like, why can't I expect you to behave the way I want you to, the way I would like you to behave?" And of course, you don't have to play my
Mhm.
game. It's my game. These are my rules, just like you're gonna have yours. Because like the some of the guys that I've spoken to, like they've said, like you're expecting too much. And when I ask them to say, okay, what's the exact thing that feels like too much for you? They've said that my expectation that somebody will be open and communicative is too much. And I said, fine. That's fine by, that maybe that's too much for you, but that is what I expect. And I also expect that if you're not able to meet me there, that you either communicate that or we figure something out. Because I also, while I understand what I would really like, I also understand that there's limitations because all of us have limitations, right? And we're not perfect. So I don't expect everything to be the way I want it to be. But I do expect that you own your shit and tell me about it. Because then we can figure something out, right? But if you don't, and if you come at me with like this sentiment of you're expecting too much, perhaps.
Yeah. But I think lowering your standards when it comes to like communication, I think that's really the wrong way to go for me personally because I don't know, in any kind of relationship, it really comes down to how you communicate with other people. Like I don't know how else you do it, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. I
it's kind of
don't
difficult to have like any
either.
kind of working relationship, whether that might be a romantic one, a platonic, professor student, whatever it might be, parents. But yeah, everything runs on that. I mean,
Yeah. I know. Someone's telling me like, "Oh, you expect too much." I'm like, "Great. I'm gonna expect even more now." Like,
mhm.
I'm sorry, not sorry. Moving on.
Yeah,
Uh,
but I think it's also about like what you bring to the table,
yeah.
and that you want to meet somebody who can, I think, meet you eye to eye, sort of, and not having to have somebody who behaves like a child that you have to drag along with you. And like, okay, if you have a problem, you need to talk to me, okay?
Use your
You know,
words, little
you,
one.
you,
Use your
use
words.
your words.
Oh
That's
God.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Mhm.
But like, okay, I'll tell you. So I recently went on like this date. Like I was telling you, the person had like this moment about opening or not opening the door, and I kind of like empathized with that moment, and we had a wonderful date. And he was actually like a gentleman in the sense of like he picked up the bill and it wasn't a fuss and it wasn't even a question. And we ordered together and everything was kind of in this very um dare I say old fashioned way. Uh and I caught myself also thinking like how nice is this? Because it's pleasant, and like it's pleasant and it's also simple and I also appreciate being looked after without having to explain myself or without having to ask like are you going to do this? While we do want to communicate things, yes, we do want to talk about, what's important and like our values or what, how we're feeling or, share so much of our experience. There are certain moments where I just want to be pampered. Like it's just straight up as simple as that. Like just look out for me because I'm gonna return that favor too. Like that is what I feel like maybe, this whole dating and mating thing is about. That we look out for each other, right? So why can't you
Mhm.
look out for me and then I'm going to look out for you and I'm going to do it in my way. And maybe that's what the feminine is that, like this old fashioned way of like, you wine and dine me. And then I get to build the supportive structures of, how this relationship goes. Because there's things that, let's say, people who are more in touch with their feminine are going to be better at. And then there's, like this kind of masculine driven go getter energy, which is really great for other things. And they're very compatible energies and they're very necessary and they need to kind of coexist. And like this whole dating game, I think like sometimes it just gets so muddled and so difficult for no reason.
Mm.
It's like, why can't you just like show up as yourself and everything's gonna be fine? Like, you do you, I'm gonna do me, and no one has to lower any standard.
So about well, actually, it was a bit more than half a year ago on a previous episode we did together. You spoke about expectations and how you deal with those, and women nowadays face a lot of expectations, as kind of all genders do. But I feel like on women, there's still a lot more, and they include how they should dress, how they should behave, speak, and what their goals should be, whether that's family oriented, career. Everybody sort of has an opinion on what women like generally should be thinking and doing and so on. How do you sort of react to such questions like in a private setting?
I don't pay attention to them anymore.
Hmm.
They
You just look away.
I don't, well, like right now, right? And I might change my mind. So
Of course,
all
yeah.
things are in flux. Don't hold me to this. Uh, like right now, the way I kind of, I'm not bothered or fussed by what people are asking me. And the less I pay attention to it and mind my own business, the less I'm being asked these questions. So I'm interviewing again, and I don't get asked if I'm married or why I'm so black anymore because I literally don't have that on my mind. Like I'm getting asked like a different set of questions because I'm thinking about something else, and like I'm showing up with a different kind of expectation, and people respond to that. And I really respectfully decline to answer anything I don't want to answer, so I just divert topics if
Hmm.
that's not what I'm interested in, or if that's not what I want to talk about, or if somebody asks me a question and I really don't want to talk about it, I'll just say I don't want to talk about it.
I think what has helped me personally was maybe sometimes even just answering a different question, like entirely different question that nobody's actually asked me. Where I'll just go, I've been thinking about women's rights a lot, and what do you think about the pay gap? And then people will be like
Nice.
flustered, and then they're like, "Oh wow, yeah," and then they can't really like get back on that track of like, do you really think you should dress that way? That's not feminine enough, or it's too revealing, or whatever it is, It's always too much or too little anyway, so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Pay gap. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the examples that you could come up with, but I think, yeah, that's also kind of fun to like um see the reaction on people's faces sometimes, when you come up with like an important, in-depth, different answer to what they were expecting.
Like the thing that I've been pondering lately a lot is the question of our freedom. And until all of us are free, none of us are free. As long as there's any any single person anywhere that is being oppressed for whatever reason, like gender, race, religion, I like whatever category you want to put them into, and you want to make somebody separate because of
Mhm.
something. It just leads back to suffering for all of us. And like, I guess my invitation to everyone would be to kind of look into how you're dealing with those things, or how you're looking at the scenarios or the thoughts and the beliefs you have right now about what freedom is for you and how that can look like for everyone else around you. And if you do come up with an answer, if you can maybe try to enact that by doing something, and again, it can be something really small, turns into something that that person does for somebody else. And, before you know it, you've done something meaningful and liberating for 1,000 people and amplify that impact.
So for all of our listeners, please also do feel free to join in the conversation with your opinions, your experience in the comments on social media, or send it into our email at theupfrontpodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to hear the first episode with Liz, please go back to episode number 3, wherever you're listening right now. And Liz, thank you so much for being on here today. Again, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nina. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. Please do consider subscribing wherever you are listening right now, so you won't miss out on any new episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at The Upfront Podcast and join in the conversation. See you next time.